Only when we admit we know nothing can we truly learn. I once met an elderly man at a small coffee shop. He sat quietly, sipping his black coffee, eyes reflective, like someone who had weathered many seasons of life. I asked him what the most valuable lesson he had learned was. He smiled gently and said, "I learned the most after realizing I know nothing at all." Back then, I didn't quite understand. But over the years, after climbing a few ladders of success and falling off a few others, I began to see. Only when we're honest with ourselves, admitting we don't know, do we open ourselves to learning. But the moment we think we've known enough, the door to wisdom quietly shuts. As children, we learn instinctively. A child never hesitates to ask why, never feels shame in saying, "I don't know." That very state of unknowing is what fuels their boundless curiosity. But as we grow older, something changes. Surrounded by expectations to know, to be right, to impress, we begin to lose that sacred ability to truly learn. I remember once giving a lecture at a prestigious university. Among the students was a quiet young man. He didn't take notes, didn't ask questions, just stared as if he already knew everything I was saying. After class, I asked him, "You seem to understand everything, don't you?" He replied, "Yeah, I think I got it." Nothing really new. 3 years later, I ran into him again. He had dropped out. He admitted, "Honestly, I didn't understand anything, but I was too afraid to say, I don't know. I wish I had the courage to ask questions back then." I was silent. It turns out ego, the mask of knowledge, is what kills learning. It makes us live in the illusion of understanding while we're empty inside. It turns classrooms into stages and every student into an actor pretending they already know. There was once a renowned professor who, after decades of research, stood before a hall packed with students and began his lecture with a simple line: "The more I study, the more I realize how little I know." The room fell silent, not because he lacked knowledge, but because he was wise enough to see how much more there is to know. And it was this honesty that earned him respect. After all, wisdom isn't measured by how much you know, but by how humble you remain. I recall walking along a quiet river in Kyoto and meeting a potter shaping clay with deep focus. His works were displayed in museums around the world. Yet when I asked him his secret, he simply said, "I craft like an eternal beginner. Every time I think I've mastered the shape, the clay teaches me something new. The clay doesn't speak, yet it molds the soul. Just like knowledge, it keeps teaching those who are willing to listen." One of the people I admire most is a motorbike mechanic. He never went to college, but he treats every engine like a delicate patient. Once someone asked why he didn't expand his shop. He said, "Because I'm still learning every day. Every motorbike is a new lesson. I won't scale up until I truly understand what I'm doing." No degrees, no polished words, just the mindset of a man who knows he hasn't known enough. My life began to change when I learned to bow before what I didn't know. I started learning from the children I taught, from street vendors, from people collecting scraps, even from those who once hurt me. Because every person, every experience holds a lesson if you're humble enough to learn. I learned to pause before judging. I learned to ask more than answer. I learned to live as someone still learning. And oddly enough, when I stopped trying to appear smart, people trusted me more. When I said, "I don't know, but I'd like to understand," others opened up. When I admitted I was wrong, they opened their hearts. True learning began to blossom in those moments of honest humility. We don't need to know everything. We just need the courage to learn. And learning doesn't begin with books. It begins with the simplest sentence, "I don't know." Sometimes we travel far, not to find knowledge, but to rediscover ourselves. The curious child we once were, unafraid to ask, unashamed to be wrong, and always open to learn. If you ever feel small in a world too vast, that's a good sign. Because that feeling is the beginning of wisdom. And if there's ever a moment when you suddenly realize, "I honestly don't know anything," smile. Because that's when you've truly begun to learn.